Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety Committee meeting. We were a couple seconds late because today is also the celebration of the 50th anniversary of consumer protection in Montgomery County. And tomorrow we'll be giving a proclamation in honor of that as well. But this afternoon, we actually have just one item, though it's a lot on the one item. It's a briefing on the crime statistics update and violent crime trends in Montgomery County. And as we begin, I'm going to ask my committee members if they have any opening remarks, and then I'll ask Chief Jones if he does, and welcome Chief Jones, by the way. And with that, we'll go through the packet that Ms. Farad once again has done a fabulous job in preparing. So with that, do either one of my colleagues on the committee have any opening thoughts? No? Okay. Chief, yes, Vice President Albornoz.
I do, but I see Council President does as well, so I'll yield to him and then follow up afterwards.
I see that he did. Okay,
sure.
Council President.
I'm slow on the draw, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I don't want to belabor it. I appreciate you, Mr. Chair, adding Silver Spring to the list or enhancing it or whatever was done. We had that closed session where we discussed what had been going on in Silver Spring a while ago. We've had several different discussions, and I've met with the chief and I've met with Commander McBain. I'm glad we're holding this, and I know there's talk of another public forum as well. Violent crime is up in Silver Spring, and so is significant fear among both residents and businesses. So I'm very glad we're talking about it. We have heard. I watched the presentation by the chief and Commander McBain of the presentation they made before the Silver Spring Citizens Advisory Board in October. And I know we were told there was a new sergeant and 6 officers coming and a number of things. I'm really interested in hearing how things are going, because the perception I hear from constituents, both residents and business owners, is that they're really terrified. And unfortunately, many are taking their money. People have lived in downtown Silver Spring or a few blocks from the central business district for years, taking their money to other jurisdictions and other parts of the county, unfortunately. And a lot of people who are very afraid to go to Silver Spring at all, even though they have bought a house nearby and now they're thinking of relocating. So I think this is I'm glad we're talking about it. I think it's somewhat overdue. Many of us have been asking for more visibility and more enforcement or restoration of enforcement for quite a while, and return to what we had 4 and 10 years ago with more visible presence on Ellsworth and Veterans Plaza. Many community organizations have asked for that. That doesn't mean everyone I speak to want policing. They don't want over-policing. They don't want discriminatory enforcement. They don't want racial profiling. And I think we all know the difference, and we have a great police force, and they certainly know the difference as well. So eager to get to the details, and glad we're having this. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few thoughts up front. So I always appreciate these briefings, but this one in particular is really important. And Susan, once again, has done an outstanding job of putting together this information. I know in collaboration with Montgomery County Police and all of our stakeholders. But at the core of this, the most fundamental thing we as a government can provide to our residents is safety and security.
Right.
And the numbers are sobering, to say the least. And it's not unique to our community. That's not to minimize what's happening here, but this is part of a national trend that is a byproduct of this just chaotic and disorienting last 2 years that we've all experienced together. Some of this is a direct fallout of all of that. I mean, you can draw a straight line between the fact that our children and youth for almost a year and a half were not able to access out-of-school time programs, social services, and other programs that would normally have been offered through schools. Many of our residents are unemployed as a result of what has transpired and are in crisis. And we also have to connect the dots between the unusually large behavioral health issues that we're seeing that are rising to a clinical level, and the fact that our very providers who are tasked with providing those support services are exhausted and overwhelmed themselves. You couple that with the ongoing challenges that we are having in this incredibly important time as we try to address generational issues of inequities within our criminal justice system, but with some of the realities of, as we address those issues, that include the smallest police force class that we've had in over 20 years, applications that are down, morale that's low, and a variety of other issues that are leading to recruitment and retention that have been well documented, and this committee has discussed numerous times before. So with all of that as a backdrop, we have to acknowledge that on a good day, we ask too much of our law enforcement officers, and we have to be diligent and holistic in how we address these issues. And I am very interested in Chief Jones's recommendations on the short term, the midterm, but frankly, the long term too. And while this session, as it should be appropriately, is within our Public Safety Committee, I mean, it could be connected to housing, it could be connected to transportation, it could be connected to HHS, it could be connected to education, because these are all contributing factors into what we are seeing right now. So we've received a lot of correspondence on this, as we should, from constituents who do not feel safe. And unfortunately, in some cases, are taking matters into their own hands. We've had a record number of gun purchases in Montgomery County. So this is something that we have to not just discuss and strategize, but really enact and support, all doing it in a manner that's respectful and that honors and ensures that everyone feels safe, equitably safe, and all that brings. So I look forward to this discussion, and I know that it's going to spawn a lot of other conversations, which I fully expected to. But I've been thinking a lot about this. I know you all have as well, and I look forward to the discussion. And yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Chief Jones, did you have anything to add? And certainly we're going to be calling on you throughout the packet. So, but did you have any opening statements?
I do, and thank you, Council President Hucker, as well as to our committee, Mr. Chair, Council Member Katz, and Council Member Albanaz. With me today is, you can't see him on camera right now, but I promise you they're in the room, is Assistant Chief Dinesh Patel, Chief of our Investigative Services Bureau, as well as Assistant Chief Darren Frank, Chief of our Management Services Bureau. And I do want to say that as we have been involved in really trying to work on issues throughout the county, that is, as noted, that there are significant crime issues that have gone up around the country, but to also state here in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, where crime really has no boundaries. And Montgomery County is not absent of those incidents occurring in our county, as we so well know. But I will state that we have had significant issues, not only in Silver Spring, but across the entire county, where we've had significant increases in certain types of crimes that have raised many concerns amongst my staff, as we have tried to determine as best we can in many cases sort of what is the root cause for some of these crimes. Some we know, some we have no idea why individuals have committed some heinous acts over the past year or two. And I will tell you, 2021 is a completely different look than the year of 2020, based upon the pandemic. As many people have really come outside and been more involved in other types of activities in 2021 throughout the pandemic year. We have put together significant strategies. We've had significant successes in some of the things that we have addressed as it relates to crime in our county. And we've been able to, again, to be able to thwart some of those crime issues throughout the county, but we still have a lot of work to do. I have stated significantly in my 36-year career, I have never seen the amount of guns and gun activity that is currently on our streets here in Montgomery County here in the year of 2021. Never seen it, and we've got a lot to talk about as it centers around that and how we are working with several partners and as well as other community members in order to address some of those issues. So I look forward to the discussion. I think it is a long overdue discussion because I think our community deserves to know what's happening and what is our police department doing about it. And as we move forward, I promise you that we have been committed to providing a safe community as best we can. And we are, again, I think there's a lot to discuss, and some of these successes that we will know today and some of the strategies as we move forward about other types of incidents that are occurring in Montgomery County. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you up front for everything that you and every member of your department does for everyone in Montgomery County. And with that, Ms. Farag, we're going to turn to you and thank you for everything you do for Montgomery County and to lead us through this packet, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. And all of the council members and Chief Jones have all hit on various points that are already in this staff packet, so I hope I don't repeat them too much. There are going to be several points of different types of crime that the committee is going to be briefed on today. I've listed them on the front page, most notably violent crime and firearms, also information about carjackings, domestic violence, and some other traffic-related issues. I do want to preface this entire conversation by saying most of the data that the department has given me, and they gave me 40 pages of crime stats, is through the third quarter, through September 30th. But there are some exceptions to that. There are some pieces that have data up through November 12th. And I had asked for an update on homicides in the county because unfortunately we've had several more homicides this month. And I just wanted you to have the most up-to-date information. So I will specify when the dates are differing as we go through this packet. And there's another thing that I'd like to bring up in this conversation as you move forward with this. I think it's really important to have this conversation within the context of having fewer police officers. In February 2021, there was an authorized sworn complement of 1,307 officers. And at that point in time, 30 spots were vacant. There was a budget cut of 25 officer positions for FY22, and there was also the civilianization of one captain position so that they could create the civilian assistant chief position. So you now have an authorized sworn complement of 1,281. Concerning to me at this point is that there are now 60 vacancies among that sworn complement. That means there's been a reduction of 56 police officers that could be out on the street between February and now. And I think it's really critical to understand this as the police department moves forward with with limited resources, how the council and other policy stakeholders can help support the policing. And as Council Vice President Albornoz mentioned, there are many other governmental responses and community partnerships that are critical in helping to prevent and reduce violent crime. And today I'm just limiting this to the police department because it's about public safety and their operations to date.
Can I interrupt 1 second, please? So that
Sure.
since we're using numbers here, I wanted to be clear on what the numbers were. Right now, in Montgomery County, we have a sworn we have a budgeted amount for 1,281 sworn police officers.
That's correct. That's
right
correct.
now, we have 1,221 sworn police officers. Is
Right.
that correct? So even if we hadn't reduced the 25, we still would no one who was in that 25 was fired. So
No.
it was by retirement or attrition or whatever. So we still would not be able to get to air complement even if we hadn't reduced the 25. Am I right in saying that?
That's correct. And considering, we'll get into that in a little bit, considering the challenges that there are with recruiting, I believe there are 13 candidates in the current class, right? So there are not enough to replace attrition at this point. So,
And we need to, and we will have that discussion,
right.
obviously, but we need to figure out how we can correct that as quickly as possible. So with that, I will try not to interrupt you again.
No, that's fine.
However, I bet I will. But
and so again, you've all briefly touched on this. Violent crime has surged across the nation in many different jurisdictions, and the FBI came out with its preliminary 2020 crime stats, its annual report in September. Violent crime across the nation is up 5.6% during 2020, and homicides as a subset of that increased by 29%. And Montgomery County has not been immune to that. They also had a 21% increase in homicide during 2020. Violent crime didn't go up quite as much. But there's a table, I provided a summary table of an overview of violent crime for you on page 2. Again, the police department gave very complete data, and there is more data available on circle 11 of your staff report. But just very quickly, aggravated assaults this year, and this is year-to-date change for the third quarter, September 30th. Aggravated assaults are up 24%, simple assaults up 3%, homicides are up 29%. Kidnapping is an outlier because there's not really enough incidents to really qualify that, but it's up by 500%. Commercial robberies are up by 48%. Carjackings are up 126%. Individual robberies are up almost 4%. Sex offenses up 34%, and a total violent crime increase of 6.1% for this year, 2021. There's a summary table on page 3 for nonviolent crimes, and oddly, most nonviolent crime has actually gone down in the past couple of years, which is unusual because they generally trend together. But notably, it's down almost 2% in the county for 2021. There are a couple of exceptions to that. Auto thefts are up almost 23%, and identity theft is up 73%. One of the most concerning trends we're seeing now is homicides. As I indicated before, they increased nationally by 29% last year, and they increased 21% here in the county during the same time period. This year, and this is the number that I'd asked the department for updated data on, there have been 30 homicides in the county through November 30th of this year, and that's compared to 17 total in 2020. That's over 76% increase between the 2 years. That does not include 2 homicides that were ruled as justifiable. To put these numbers in perspective, because a lot of the national conversation is about, well, yes, violent crime is increasing, but it's nowhere near the levels in the 90s, and that's true. Violent crime spiked in 94, I believe, and homicides spiked in 91. But there is an expanded homicide offense count derived from the FBI's UCR data on page 3 that shows a few spikes up near 30 homicides, which is what we're experiencing now. There were 30 homicides in 2015. 8 of those were gang-related homicides that the council and the county executive addressed by adding positions both to the state's attorney's office and to the police department. In 2002, there were 32 homicides. That was the same year as the Beltway snipers. And in 94, there were 34 homicides, and I do not know what the trends were behind that number. Again, that was when crime was at its highest. That cannot be compared apples to apples because there were about 800,000 people in the county at the time. There are almost 1.2 million now. The current causes of homicides in the county vary. Of the 22 homicides reported through September 30th, 4 were domestic violence and 10 others occurred between persons known to one another. And the department's made arrests in 14 of those 22 homicides. They also indicate that during the first 3 quarters of the year, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th districts were accounted for all but 6 homicides in the county. Again, as committee members have touched on, the prevalence of firearms is of grave concern. Nationally, gun violence began to rise significantly when COVID-19 just upended all types of community behavior back in April of 2020. According to the Washington Post, Americans purchased 23 million guns in 2020, which reflects a 66% increase over 2019 sales. I have Maryland background check data from the NICS, and that's a proxy that's often used to gauge the magnitude of gun sales. In Maryland, that increased significantly as well, from about 149,000 in 2019 to 302,000 checks in 2020. And there's a chart there to show some trends over time on page 4.
And if I can interrupt on that for a second,
Sure.
That talks about the sales in Maryland. But if someone went to Virginia and bought a weapon, that would not, and that would not be reflected in these numbers. Do we have any idea how how much sales have increased in their neighboring states?
I don't, but I can get that information.
I mean, it's something that we should be aware of, I believe.
Okay. In total, firearm-related violent crime has increased about 36% from the same reporting period last year. The department advises that the increase is being primarily driven by robberies, aggravated assaults, and homicides where firearms are used. There was a 29% increase in aggravated assaults this year compared to last, and robberies of which a firearm was used have increased by 42%. Firearms are also used in most homicides in the county this year. Of the 30 homicides reported, at least 20 were committed with handguns. Weapons offenses where firearms have discharged have also increased. That's just a discharge offense. It's a non-contact shooting. Nobody was injured necessarily in it. Discharging offenses more than doubled from 2019. There were 23 incidents in 2020 to 49 incidents. And so far this year, discharging of firearms offenses continues to increase, although the increase has slowed to about 12%. Also concerning, the department advises there have been several incidents.
Susan, can I ask one
Sure.
question, please? Sure. Council Vice President, did you want to speak now, or did you want to speak now?
I think so, just because
Okay,
there's
well,
so
go ahead,
much,
please.
and
Yeah.
it's
couldn't
going to be
tell
hard
from your-
to process all of it. So I apologize. Normally, I like to wait until after presentations, but there's just so much content here.
Right,
It
well,
could get lost in translation. So on it's horrible. Murder specifically, Susan. I know that, and Chief Jones, I'm sure we'll be able to answer this too, but I know that of our homicides, this was last year, a significant majority of them related to drug sales, and specifically marijuana. How many of those homicides that are non-domestic related, or maybe some of them are domestic related, were done in some way, either directly or 1 degree removed from some type of drug transaction?
So we don't have all of the full numbers, but because we have some cases that remain open that we haven't identified as the true motive of that investigation. I know we have one recent homicide that we're looking at that we believe had a drug nexus to it. So I think I would not say that the vast majority of our homicides this year are drug-related homicides. But I will, there's a combination of a variety of motives behind our homicides this year, outside of being domestic or acquaintance related. Some of it is basically just, you may say, jealousy, or you might even say those cases that they were just heat of the moment exchanges of incidents that occurred. So we've got a wide variety of things that are behind the motives of our homicides this year. Again, some of them we don't have answers to as of yet.
Okay, I appreciate that. And do we know the percentage of those cases that have been closed, or where we have a suspect in which a registered firearm was used versus one that was illegally purchased?
We don't have that right off the top of our head. We'd have to look more into each case to come up with that data. We do know that we have had cases that involve, ghost guns. We've had cases that have involved sub-illegal weapons, but I don't have the specific numbers at this time.
And while obviously we're talking about murders, I would assume there are many more people whom have been shot and may have been fortunate not to die. Do we track that information in terms of how many people have been shot, not just murdered with firearms? Yes,
we do. They fall under the aggravated assault category. So your aggravated assaults occur with either individuals being shot, seriously wounded by stab wounds, which is a knife or some other object, or basically a very again, it's an aggravated assault where an individual might have been assaulted and near death, basically. So we don't again have those specific numbers as to how many we have by guns, but we can get those numbers for you.
I got
Go ahead, you're talking.
So, Councilman Albanaz, as relates to what we would call the non-fatal contact shooting. So that's a shooting where somebody was actually shot. From this year thus far, we've had 41 incidents. Last year we had 24, and the year before that, a little bit more normalized, was 27. So we're up significantly in the number of non-fatal contact shootings. And also, I think Susan's going to talk a little bit later about just the number of rounds being fired in these incidents is also very concerning.
And Chief and Assistant Chief Patel, how are we doing on tips? I know that we've, over many years, because of trust, because of great proactive community police work and relationships we have within communities, we've been able to close cases at a much higher rate than most other jurisdictions, particularly those of our size. But some of that is predicated on, the relationships we have within the community. Generally speaking, are you finding it the same, more difficult, better in terms of, tips that we're receiving, particularly in these homicide cases?
So I think what you would hear from our detectives on the street, in particular with the non-contact shootings, which are really just one step away from being a homicide, is that we face a great deal of resistance and a lack of cooperation from both victims and witnesses in many of the cases, which makes it very challenging to get to the source. And I think what you've seen, especially not just in the Up County, but certainly in the Up County, we're tracking several shootings over the summer. There's a lot of what I would say tit for tat. One shooting occurs and then there's retaliation. And in the middle of that, it's a great lack of cooperation with this mindset of we're going to solve the problem ourselves. So I think that has turned, not the community in general, I think is still helpful and useful and we have good relationships. But as it relates to those that we're finding involved in violent crime on both sides of the equation, we're seeing less cooperation than we used to.
Okay. And we're going to get to the solutions page, but this proliferation of weapons that are out on the street obviously is a huge cause for concern. It just rises to just incomprehensible levels. But I'll defer my questions regarding what steps we may be able to take and have some suggestions based on some research I've done, which I'm sure is consistent with research you guys have done. But I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chair, to go through the rest of the packet until we get to the solutions section.
Thank you. And if I could do just a couple more clarifications. How many of the murders or the aggravated assaults would have been gang related?
We have had very few gang related incidents that have been homicides or aggravated assaults this year. I think what I can say is that I think we feel very confident that the resources that you all provided us for increasing the investigative gang unit, providing additional investigators for that, have been very helpful along the way to help us really kind of deter those types of crimes in some regards. Now, we do have some homicides, I will say. There's a handful of homicides where clearly we don't have a clear motive as of yet. And we have not ruled out that these potentially may have some gang affiliation to them. So I want to caution you on that mindset, particularly with, as Assistant Chief Patel just noted, that we have some shootings that have occurred and we're really not sure when we've had these multiple rounds being fired, because there have been no witnesses that are victims who've come forward to provide us what was the reason behind these particular incidents. So therefore, we cannot say that they were not gang related at this point in time. So we're trying to monitor that activity as well, but we have not received any intelligence that suggests that it was absolutely gang related, that we could verify that.
Okay, thank you. Susan, please continue.
The next thing I wanted to touch on is what Chief Patel just briefly mentioned. There have been several incidents where 10 or more shots were fired in the community, and two recent events in October had very large numbers of shots fired. On October 3rd in a drive-by jump-out incident on Georgia Avenue. More than 50 shots were fired from both handguns and a rifle. 2 victims were hit in that, and multiple storefronts and parked cars were struck. And on October 16th, a similar incident happened on Fenton Street. 45 casings were recovered from a running shootout along the street. Several cars and apartments were also struck. And this is very concerning. It's just by sheer luck that no innocent victims have been hit in these types of gunfire incidents.
And were those people arrested?
I don't know.
Do you know, Chief?
And those incidents, Mr. Katz, no, there have been no arrests made in those particular incidents at this time.
And what time of the day did these occur?
So the one that occurred on Georgia Avenue actually occurred on a Saturday afternoon at 4:00 in the afternoon. The one that Ms. Farag is noting that occurred on Fenton occurred in the early morning hours, about 3 a.m. in the morning. So there's again, a wide range, and some you would say, in fact, the one that occurred on 4:00 in the afternoon was a very brazen event. But I will say, for that particular event, we believe that the individuals that were involved, this was a targeted event going after an individual by a group of individuals, particularly we believe to be out of the District of Columbia, as that was near the Washington, D.C. The line.
Okay. Very upsetting to say that, obviously, to every one of us. Please, Ms. Farag.
On page 6, there is a map that shows 2021 contact shootings and homicide locations, and that is through September 30th. And again, the contact shootings where somebody has been hit by gunfire but does not die. And it just gives you an idea of the geographic regions of where those incidents are occurring. The recovered firearms information, there's a chart again on page 6 that shows recovered guns, including the privately made firearms, which is a more appropriate and technical term for ghost guns. So far in 2021, the department has recovered 932 firearms, and that's compared to 652 last year. Again, 2020 might be an outlier because of how community behavior changed due to COVID. In 2019, the year before, the department recovered 884. Of those recovered this year, 53 were ghost guns, and the department had recovered 38 of those last year and just 8 in 2019. So the numbers are increasing. Most of these ghost guns or PMFs have been recovered in the 3rd district so far.
And the 3rd district is Silver Spring.
Correct. Sorry. There's information on carjackings on page 7. As
Wait, Susan, hold one second.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember. Mr. Vice President, go ahead.
No problem. Gabe is fine too.
I can handle that.
Yeah. Susan or Chief, can you talk a little bit about where these guns were confiscated? Just were they done? You know, I know that there have been several stories written in the last few months about guns that were confiscated during regular traffic stops, but could you talk just generally about where we've had some success in confiscating the weapons?
So it's a variety of locations, as you noted, Councilmember Albanaz. One being, yes, we do recover. I believe I do have some numbers. I'll find a number of guns that are recovered on traffic stops that are illegally possessed. I think we're somewhere. I think earlier this year, I think we were somewhere around 46 guns that have been recovered on traffic stops. And then we look at other areas in which we recover guns, whether it's generally off of a search warrant, that we may be doing search warrants as it relates to an investigation. It may be found on a crime scene. It may be just a variety of different locations. So, I'm sorry. We do, of course, the extreme risk protection orders. And those also are counted as recovered firearms whenever there's an individual that under the mental illness component that the courts allow us to actually seize weapons from those individuals as well. So there's a vast majority of different types of investigations that will lend us to actually have seizures of weapons.
Got it. And then on the ghost gun issue, which I appreciate having worked with your team on to try and stay in front of, but that, of course, our legislation is currently on hold as it makes its way through the courts. But while it just, I know that this is once again coming up at the state level. And Ms. Farag, if we can find out when there will be an opportunity to provide testimony on the state bill with regards to ghost guns, if you could please share that with us. I would like to testify. I would suspect I may not be the only one, because we're limited in what we can do at the local level in engagement, but we really do need our state partners here, who I know have been very focused on this. But this is just a general question, again, while we're talking about guns specifically. You know, the state of Maryland has some of the strongest gun safety laws in the country. And I think that we're all proud of them. I think that they you know, by and large have been reasonable and held. Yet despite all that, you know, we're seeing these increases. And so it's a little bit of a broad brush question here, Chief, but do you think that is enforcement the issue, or are there just not enough policies as an issue? I mean, just the sheer numbers are very sobering. And just in your professional experience, having been around a long time and have acknowledged you haven't seen what you're seeing right now, what's your take? And I know this is broad, and maybe we should be doing this at a restaurant somewhere, but just like what do you think is going on? Just and what, from just a sheer policy perspective, is there anything we can do about it?
Well, I think, you know, what is very unique in this country is the fact that, you know, an individual can cross state lines and actually go and purchase a handgun in another jurisdiction. And there's ways for people, and particularly those who should not legally be allowed to possess a handgun, can still find ways in order to find a handgun or multiple guns. And when we look at situations where there are straw purchases in other states, you know, across this country, where individuals can go to another state and actually have someone else buy a gun for them, who can legally actually purchase that weapon, but then illegally basically provide that handgun to the person who is prohibited. Plus, there is a significant black market for handguns and other types of weapons that exist in all communities, and Montgomery County is no stranger to that. I mean, the reality is, you know, there are individuals who that's the world that they live in. They sell illegal weapons to individuals who, you know, they sell them illegally, and therefore, and then you also have where, as we have more people who are actually purchasing guns in our society, when individuals break into homes, they look for weapons. And therefore, we find a large amount of weapons are in individuals' hands that have been stolen out of residential burglaries. And we are able to trace them that way as well. So there is a wide variety of ways that people in the illegal market, as I call it, because most of the individuals that we arrest are those individuals who don't legally have the authority to possess a gun. And so we continuously are chasing down leads. We work with our friends at ATF and other you know, law enforcement partners to sort of try to track these kinds of cases down. But I can tell you this is significant throughout the United States. This is just not a Montgomery County problem. This is a problem that happens all across the country.
And Susan, just a related question. We're talking about homicides, and but do we track the number of suicides that have been used by firearms? Is that anywhere in the data?
I don't have that data. It might be HHS data, but I can ask and get that for you.
Chief, do you know by any chance?
We have the data. We don't have the numbers by hand, but we have the data of the number of suicides that are by firearm. We do have that, yes.
Okay. And do you know, I'm putting you on the spot, but just, I think obviously it's all sort of connected here, firearms being the common denominator.
Right.
But just before the end of the session, if one of you guys could pull up one of those numbers, I'd really appreciate it, because I want to provide the full context. Where I'm going with this is, we haven't really had the need, at least in our community, as has been the case in other communities, with regards to just general education about firearms. All the things that you said, the fact that you're statistically much more likely to be shot by your own gun than an intruder. And there's just a myriad of data points that are out there that people who are considering buying a firearm because they may feel unsafe for whatever reason, and that's something we're trying to address here, just should be thinking about as we move forward, and obviously do everything we can to get the existing firearms that are out there off the street as well. I've shared this story before publicly, but I'm going to share it again right now because it's relevant to this discussion. When I was about 9 years old, give or take, I was doing what kids do, rummaging through the house looking for Christmas gifts, and came across a firearm that was in our house that was legally purchased, that my family ended up subsequently turning back into law enforcement legally as well. But I played with that gun, and thank God it did not have ammunition in it, and it was stored in an area that was locked. I just happened to be able to figure out how to get in, and it's just, I will never forget. I've been reflecting on that a lot in this last year and a half, especially with my own kids, and just how south that could have gone. And so I think that this is something that we absolutely have to pay more attention to. It's not just a public safety issue, it's a public health issue, because this is a public health emergency, clearly. And it's just something that, we're going to have to focus on even more than we have been. So anyways, I yield back to you, Mr. Chair, for now. I'll probably step in again. I apologize.
No, I hope you will. But Chief, let me ask, when we're using the term firearms, most of these, I'm saying it like I know what I'm asking, but I would assume that most of these firearms are handguns. Is that correct?
That is correct. Absolutely. Yes.
And have we recovered many firearms because of the red flag law that people who have been under the domestic violence, it's probably not the right name for it, but that was what it was called. The red flag law that they couldn't have a firearm in the house. Have we recovered anything from that as well?
Yeah, so we do have numbers. We'll have to pull those up from extreme risk protection orders, which
Right.
again, once we identify that the individual is either a danger to themselves or to others, but then that we file court, we actually file for a court order to be able to seize those guns from that individual for a period of time, and in order to again try to maintain the safety in our community, which we found that to be very successful, and we have had again some success with that. So we'll have to pull up the numbers that we've had for this year. I know we've had again working with not only just our department, but also with the Sheriff's Department, Montgomery County Sheriff's Department, which plays a significant role in that as well, particularly as they also do domestic violence investigations and the like, and mental health, with emergency evaluation petitions. So they are also involved in that in the other departments as well.
Thank you. Susan, we're going to try to move on. Okay.
The next thing I wanted to touch on was carjackings on page 7. I briefly mentioned this before. They had increased 126% this year, and that's through September 30th compared to the same time period last year. The department also gives a couple of snapshots at the rate in which these carjackings are increasing between January 1st and November 12th. There have been 56 carjackings in the county, and the department indicates that from January 2019 to September 2020, there was an average of 1.6 carjackings per month. And since December 2020, that average has jumped to 5.6 carjackings per month. The department has arrested individuals associated with 26 of these. 73% of the vehicles were recovered outside of Montgomery County, and only 3 of the individuals who've been arrested for carjacking were Montgomery County residents. Of the 28 individuals arrested this year, 13 were juveniles, and at least 1 juvenile was arrested in 12 carjacking events. Handguns were used in half of all carjackings in the county.
And of the 12 carjacking events, were all of those in Montgomery County?
Yes, I think so.
Unbelievable. Please.
Sure.
Vice President Gade.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Chief, could you talk a little bit about the regional efforts to address this? I know that this obviously is not just a Montgomery County problem, and as we heard, the folks that have been arrested by and large are not from our community. Shouldn't matter where they're from, obviously, right. but at the same time, there's only so much we have control over. But could you talk a little bit about the regional approach specifically as it relates to carjackings?
Absolutely. And so, we began to see this rise and really the violent carjackings that were occurring in particularly the earlier part of this year. And it wasn't just occurring here in Montgomery County, as Ms. Frog noted earlier, where the vast majority of these incidents are actually occurring in Silver Spring predominantly. But they were happening all across the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And so therefore, we stood up a regional carjacking task force that also included the FBI, Prince George's County, and the Metropolitan Police Department, as well as some agencies over in Northern Virginia, because of the activity that had been occurring. And what we did discover was the fact that, as noted, that these vehicles were actually, we were finding that the majority of the vehicles were actually being dumped in, and I say dumped because there was no other way to put it. They were just basically being driven to the District of Columbia, to different parts of primarily in the southeastern part of the District of Columbia, and they were just left abandoned. And there was really it has been no other motive for individuals who have been involved in these types of incidents. There's not a monetary motivation behind it. There has been no where they're actually just keeping the vehicles for themselves. They're actually just basically, to some degree, we found a lot of younger people, juveniles involved in these types of incidents, which was very disturbing in its own right. And that is, and I think the youngest that we arrested someone was around 14 years of age in Silver Spring. So we have made a concerted effort to also put additional resources in the Silver Spring area. As this was occurring, that we had our special assignment team, our district community action team, as well as our fugitive team that actually worked with our crime analysts. And a lot of these incidents really were occurring as what I call crimes of opportunity, that when, that these individuals whether you were pulling up to an ATM machine or whether you were pulling up at a gas station, if they saw the opportunity to basically to actually take advantage of a victim, they were taking those opportunities. And we were actually able to, in a few of those incidents, actually watch the crimes occur in our own presence, and actually be able to find those individuals, pursue them, and actually make arrests without any serious injury or damage. But the reality is that, again, these are crimes of opportunity. It is a trend that has ticked up in this region, and we continue to monitor it. But we are working with our other partners in order to be able to identify. We have identified some of these individuals that have worked together as groups to literally be driving one carjacked vehicle and then have another individual jump out of that car and carjack another, and two carjacked vehicles are traveling down the roadway at one time. So this is the activity that we have seen over the past year.
And if I could just, thank you, Chief. And if I could just note, Councilmember Harker just let me know, and I know that Ms. Frog is working on it. The State's Attorney, John McCarthy, wants to join and wants to discuss what's going on with them as well. And Mr. Council President, I didn't know whether you or your cat wanted to have anything to say. I noticed your cat has been very, very busy. So
Doesn't ask my permission. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
and not a problem, but I enjoyed it. I did. I thought it was fun. All right. So Susan, are you able to get John McCarthy a link?
I just sent him the link, and I
Thank you,
asked
Susan.
Quinn if you could let him in when he is able to sign on.
Okay. So we'll call on him as soon as he gets here. And if you could continue on, and we'll go back with whatever Mr. McCarthy wanted to talk about.
Okay. The next thing I wanted to touch on briefly, it's not violent crime per se, but it's still concerning, kind of related to carjackings, is the increase in auto thefts. Again, most nonviolent crime has decreased over the past year and a half, but this year to date, there have been over 1,200 auto thefts compared to 1,100 in all of 2020. Most of these, again, have occurred in Silver Spring and Bethesda. And there's a chart on page 7 showing auto thefts year to date by district. Most of these vehicles are also recovered in DC, followed by Prince George's County, and finally here in our county.
Now, is there a pattern? Go ahead, Tom, please.
Oh, well, I just, since we're on this topic, wanted to ask, I know there were in the restructuring, Chief, over the last year, my understanding was the auto theft division was changed or adjusted. And I've talked to some officers who now are looking at the increase in auto thefts and have said, oh, well, that was maybe not the best move in hindsight. Do you have thoughts on how that's working and what's driven this?
So what we had was prior to sort of a reduction in force, you might say, when we came up with the budget cuts that actually was presented to council, was we had to make a decision on some positions that had to be cut. So what I did was I had the centralized auto theft unit disbanded. The only two positions that were cut out of that unit was the sergeant and the corporal. The actual investigators from that unit were actually sent to each police district where they were then still in their job titles as being auto theft investigators, but it was now from a decentralized approach. So there was only a unit of a sergeant, a corporal, and 6 investigators. And then at the time, it was only 5 investigators. One investigator actually covered 2 districts. So they are the follow-up. They are the follow-up investigators to sort of these, and they become more involved in the individuals who are repeat offenders, and doing follow-up investigations, as well as individuals that are involved in, sort of illegal organizations that are actually, stealing cars and actually trying to ship them overseas, and doing more investigations with our auto dealerships where cars are frequently stolen from car dealerships. So with that being said, there was still an approach of that we were still investigating the auto thefts. It was just that we had decided to do it a different way in order to make that more effective. I am having Assistant Chief Patil is now looking at a more comprehensive approach as to doing this as well under his bureau to see if there is another way that we think would be even more significant, even from the centralized auto theft approach, that we think could be more impactful overall. I will say, when we look though at the vast majority of our auto thefts that have occurred over the past year or so, it again has been these crimes of opportunities. What we see now with the automation of cars, particularly newer cars. I'm sure that most of us in this call are familiar with is that we have the world of key fobs, and you have the luxury of actually just getting into your car and pushing the start button and driving on down the roadway. Well, what we have found is that there is a large amount of our community that sometimes they just leave their key fobs in their vehicles all the time. And that allows for an easier way for thieves to actually steal your cars, particularly when these individuals are involved in what we've seen a big trend in, of course, is really the number one crime in Montgomery County, which is theft from autos. And the easiest way, again, for individuals to take advantage of anybody is that if we leave our car doors unlocked, that allows you to become victim to potentially theft from auto, from items from within your car. B, if your key fob is in the car, then boom, then the individual has an easier way to just push the start button and drive the car away. And we found a lot of cases this year that has actually been the case. So from a perspective of really trying to, again, to continue to educate the public about the importance of not keeping your key fobs in your car, also making sure that we are locking our cars. From a prevention standpoint, I think that can be as impactful. But again, we have not lost sight of follow-up investigations. I want to make sure people understand where people thought that just because we disbanded the auto theft unit, that we were no longer investigating auto thefts. And I've had to make sure that even within our department, that they understood that, because there was this misinterpretation that we had just totally gotten rid of follow-up auto theft investigations, which is not the case.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Chief. So it's the same number of investigators. It was only the sergeant and the corporal that were out. Are there other resources or strategies that you could use from us to address the increase in auto thefts?
Well, I mean, again, some of those things, we want to make sure we're educating our community as much as we can.
Sure.
But we're also, when we look at it from a widespread range, we could always, want to throw more resources. For example, we do have partnerships with other regional auto theft teams in the region, because we know that there's no boundaries when it comes to thieves. And when particularly if they're doing it from a more conspiratorial type of organizational mindset, they're actually stealing cars for profit in more ways than one. So from that standpoint, we may, we might want to, that's what I was saying with Assistant Chief Patel coming up with strategies to add more of those resources and have a different approach about how we can best look at this. But, we really have to look at it from more on the preventative side as well, because the numbers are going to continue to stay at those high numbers if we don't address that in some way, form, or fashion.
Thanks. Do you know if they're up in DC? I saw that most of the vehicles are recovered in DC, but they're up in DC and Fairfax and Prince George's as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. It's a regional trend. Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Chief, just so we can be clear, please, if the auto unit that is now down by 2 people, but right now, if someone has their car stolen, then they call 911. We don't have a specialized unit that would come out. Is that correct? Does a patrol? Could you walk us through, if my car is stolen, and let me tell you, I would not be happy, but if my car is stolen, what do I do?
Right. So again, you would call our emergency communications center. You would call the 911 center non-emergency number, but you would call to report that your car was stolen. And then we would send a patrol officer out, more than likely, in order to take that report and get the information about, and to put that car into what we call our database, our NCIC database, that would alert anybody who stopped that car that this was a stolen car. Now, the follow-up, all of those investigative reports then go to the district investigative section, where the district investigative sergeant would then assign that follow-up investigation to the auto theft investigator that he or she has designated for their district for follow-up investigation to find out, further, what might else can we find out, or if the vehicle is actually recovered, let's say it's abandoned somewhere, and we get the information that, for one reason or another, a citizen calls in and says, this car has been left abandoned on my street. We don't know anything about it. We get there, the patrol officer gets there, they run the tag, they discover that the vehicle is stolen. We are going to process that vehicle as a recovered stolen auto, looking for fingerprints and other types of evidence in order to be able to try to determine who might have stolen this car. So there is additional follow-up that is always going to occur, and based upon leads that we are able to work with in order to see if we can find out who is responsible for stealing that particular vehicle.
Thanks, Chief. Susan, let's continue, please.
Sure. Just briefly, domestic violence related offenses are up 11% year to date, but that follows last year where they had trended down about 4%. And the department advises the most significant trend here is the increased severity of violence associated with intimate partner violence. Domestic strangulation became a felony last year in October. And since that change, the domestic violence unit has seen a significant increase in the number of strangulations that they've had to investigate. For drug arrests and overdoses, drug arrests for all different types of drug-related arrests is down significantly, and that's been trending for several years now. In 2018, as you'll see in a chart on page 8, there were about 6,300 arrests for all different drug-related offenses. In 2019, that fell to 5,000. In 2020, it fell to 2,200. And of course, 2020 can be an outlier, but year to date here in 2021, there have only been 875 arrests for drug-related offenses. Unfortunately, the opioid overdoses have increased in the county during the same time period, and the chart on page 8 lists them by fatal and non-fatal overdoses. And I just need to qualify this by stating these are the overdoses for which the department has been notified. So it may not encompass the entire universe of overdoses in the county.
And I do believe it should be noted, and Chief, please correct me on this, but I do believe it should be noted that if someone is involved in a drug overdose and another person calls in, then they are not arrested for calling in. Am I accurate in what I'm saying?
You're very accurate. It's the Good Samaritan law, and that is exactly right. That if an individual who is experiencing an overdose situation, that the individual who calls is not going to be held criminally responsible at that particular moment. That is correct.
The idea is we want someone to be safe, not necessarily be arrested. We want to get somebody help.
That's correct.
Please continue, Susan.
For traffic accidents, and that includes pedestrian too, the data is showing that there are actually fewer collisions occurring. However, those collisions end up having higher fatality rates, and the same holds true for pedestrian collisions. I've got a summary chart on page 9 for you, and the expanded data is available on Circle 28, which the department provided. The last item for crime stats I wanted to just very briefly touch on, because the Joint ENC and Public Safety Committee is going to have a work session on this in January to discuss all aspects of student safety, including the new community engagement officer model, as well as the new MOU and other supports and restorative justice practices that the schools will have in place sometime in January, but I don't have a firm date for that yet. So I'd ask for calls for service, because now everything's going through either 911 or the non-emergency police phone number. Everything's being reported that way. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison to prior years. And we only have 23% of this year to show any experience. And if all things remain equal, and we know they don't, as of October 31st, calls for assaults, harassment, sex offenses, and weapons were outpacing calls for service in 2018 through 2019, which is the last full year of school. And other types of offenses such as aggravated assaults, drug offenses, and robbery have declined. And I just wanted to caution that with a couple of qualifications. Again, it's not apples and apples to prior years as far as the safety model is concerned, and calls for service have absolutely no correlation to arrests or other formal dispositions.
And Chief, it's my understanding that the first quarter, you have data from the first quarter, and that will be available, I guess, during December. Is that?
Yeah, we are looking at compiling the first quarter numbers for MCPS as well as ourselves, and to be able to share that with you all on the council and the county executive's office to show the breakdown of the types of calls for service that we have responded to in the first 4 months of our school year. So we'll have a view of exactly, and we can break it down by each school. We'll be able to break it down by each school of why we are responding to these schools for the types of calls in which we received a request to respond for service.
Okay. Thank you.
This
Please.
This is obviously a very loaded issue and complicated and has a lot of layers to it because we're in this midst of a significant transition in how we're reimagining how we think about school security. But the data alone here doesn't tell the whole story. And it's important and relevant. But I also think we need to acknowledge and own the fact that, it was the council that initiated a discussion that has led us to the point that we are at right now in partnership with the executive branch. But there is a lot of confusion, a lot of it, which we have been hearing at the school level regarding what is and is not appropriate to make calls for service for. And there's also, one of the things that we're going to need to think through in this broader conversation is, it's not the officers who've been especially trained necessarily in addressing issues regarding youth or the SRO officers who have transitioned to a different beat that are the ones responding in every instance to these cases. It just, whoever happens to be on duty and is available to take that call is who is being dispatched to these particular service calls. So while, yes, I think clearly we need to look at this issue with regards to the volume and types of calls and how we're addressing those issues, I think it's really important that we provide a broader context as we evaluate and consider the ramifications of the decisions that we've made collectively and their impact right now on what's going on the ground. Because these myriad of other challenges and issues related to behavioral health, the challenges that our kids are facing, it's not an either or. We have to continue to provide the case managers, the social workers, the psychologists, all the mental health providers, and flood the zone as best we can in this environment. But there is sort of a practical reality. And I'd also like, as part of that analysis, Susan, to better understand what the roles and responsibilities are of the security officers who are supposed to be addressing these issues up front, but for whatever reason are not, and that's why it's being deferred to these calls. There's a lot of confusion among faculty, staff, the administrations of these schools, and frankly, parents and kids themselves. And it's not law enforcement's fault. This is a collective issue that I know that we're trying to work through right now. So I just wanted to highlight that and not, none of us are minimizing it, but I just wanted to underscore the complexity of it. And this is going to need an expanded conversation as soon as possible because there's a level of urgency right now. There's a petition going on right now to bring the school resource officers back that has thousands of signatures. And so it's something that we have to be sensitive to and cognizant of as we balance all the myriad of issues.
And Susan, as part of that analysis, if we could have response times as well for the schools,
Okay.
And obviously, and I heard the chief the other day say, I think 40% of the calls are for traffic related. I think my percentages are right, traffic related. So there's a difference of what someone has to be responding to quicker than other issues. but response times would be helpful as well. Okay. Please continue, Susan.
And I just wanted to jump briefly to page 11 and very briefly discuss demographic information, and then you can stop listening to me and you can listen to the police department tell you what measures they've taken to address some of these aspects of crime. I asked for a bit of demographic information on arrestees and homicide victims, and there's a much bigger data set to look at and examine, but I was really curious, especially, in relation to carjackings and the auto thefts, which are occurring by people outside the county, what percentage of arrestees in the county don't live in the county? And there's a chart on page 11 to look at that, and it's stayed pretty consistent over the past 3 years. It's about 30% of all arrests that happen in this county are of people who live outside the county. And I think that that's really a significant issue to keep in mind as the department needs to have the resources to work collaboratively with the regional law enforcement partners, which Chief Jones mentioned as far as the carjacking regional task force is concerned. And he mentioned before, crime does not have borders, right? This is a regional problem and it has to take a regional approach to it. And then just very briefly, homicide victim demographics. This is, as the committee and the full council is interested in possibly expanding racial equity work and might want to expand the analysis more fully to capture all the impacts of police work. Generally speaking, of history, historically, communities of color have suffered from violent crime at a much higher disproportionate rate than white communities have. And of the 30 homicides that we've had in this county so far this year, 16 of the victims are Black or African American. So it would be helpful to really understand the approaches that the police department can take to help quell violent crime. And it's interesting to put in context because things like hotspot policing are an evidence-based way of reducing violent crime in certain areas, and whether or not there are resources that are sufficient to provide to the police department. Do they have them now? Is it something they need moving forward into the next budget season? And I've also put discussion issues for your consideration on page 12, but now I will turn this over to the department to talk about their various initiatives.
And as part of that, Ms. Frog skipped over page 10, which was the crime suppression efforts in Silver Spring. We've certainly talked about Silver Spring several times today, but Chief, if you could focus on that as well, please.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with Silver Spring first and foremost, so we can have an idea of some of the objectives that we are really kind of focusing on, and particularly in the downtown community. As you know, the 3rd District Silver Spring, which is from downtown Silver Spring at the Washington D.C. line, and it travels east and north all the way up through White Oak. It is, of course, covers up to on New Hampshire Avenue on the Prince George's County side, all the way up to through Burdensville, up to Howard County. So it is a largely populated police district. That is it has been historically the district that has the #1 calls for service for our patrol officers. And it is the district that we would have always considered to be #1 in crime statistics consistently year after year. And of course, we began to have issues in downtown Silver Spring, particularly around areas that involved much of what we talked about earlier today, where we talked about carjackings, where we've talked about shootings in some cases, and we've talked about quality of life issues that we've had, incidents of whether it's been robberies or street robberies, or whether it's been issues of individuals dealing drugs in and around the Silver Spring Civic Center. So Commander Dave McBain is, of course, the commander of the 3rd District, and Commander McBain was directed by me to provide an answer to some of these issues in response to the activities that were going on in his district centered around crime. And so Commander McBain put together a comprehensive plan to basically create a crime suppression task force, that he put a group of officers together that Mr. Hooker noted earlier, that would address, really be visible and address crimes that were occurring primarily in the central business district of Silver Spring, and for us to, again, have some visibility, but also to be able to address the crimes and to really to be proactive in order to address these types of incidents. I will say, like, for example, during the month of November, this team has been productive. They have been able to deal with arrests that centered around attempted armed robbery, as well as traffic stops that involved handguns, a loaded handgun in vehicles on a couple of occasions, as well as other types of criminal offenses that have been impactful in the downtown area. When you talk about dealing with robberies and where there have been victims of these particular robberies, and we've had officers who have been who are in the area, who actually observed the robbery that occurred and were able to actually pursue those individuals and make an arrest, and particularly make an arrest with an individual with a loaded handgun as a result thereof. Those are disturbing things that, again, when we look at these events that are occurring in the downtown area, that concern us. And so there were these quality of life issues that centered around, again, Veterans Plaza, that, again, during my tenure as the commander of the 3rd District, where it's always been, we wanted to have Veterans Plaza to be a friendly, family-friendly area where individuals felt safe in those particular areas. It's been very disturbing to be over the past few months to hear individuals who live in or near or work in Silver Spring to talk about where they don't feel as safe as they have been. So therefore, we put a concerted effort in order to make sure that we had those patrols, and we worked with our crime analysts to look at what were some of the crimes, when were they occurring, what time were they occurring, and where were they occurring, so that we could have those officers in those nearby areas in order to address that. I don't have the full numbers, but based upon what I'm hearing, it looks like our incidents of major concern that we have been having over the last couple of months have decreased. Where we have not had the numbers of robberies that we've had in the area, or other types of crimes, aggravated assaults and the like. We have not had those shootings like we have had that we noted, the one that happened on Georgia Avenue or the one that happened on Fenton, because I think of higher visibility. So that is, again, that's the approach that we have utilized for the 3rd District. But we've also, I have directed Assistant Chief Willie Parker-Lone, who is the chief of our Patrol Services Bureau, to work with each of the district commanders to really look at what are the incidents that are occurring in their specific districts, to have what we call directed patrols at what we look at intelligence-based policing, where we are, from an evidence base, where we're seeing where these crimes are occurring throughout our district, no matter what the crime, whether it's a theft from auto, or whether it's robberies or some other type of incidents, where we are going to have more directed patrols. I spoke to Chief Parker-Lone earlier today, and he has given direction, particularly with, where we have seen smash and grab incidents that have occurred across the country, of going into department stores where, droves of individuals have gone into these stores and basically committed these massive thefts, really just overtaken and probably, scaring not only the employees, but the customers as well. So we are looking at, again, having more directed patrols in our shopping areas as we approach the holiday season, because we think that's important in order to have, again, working towards having higher visibility along the way. We've done, again, some significant advances. Assistant Chief Dinesh Patel has led as we looked at these shootings that have been occurring all across the county. And what we're finding is that, working in partnership with federal agencies like the agencies such as the ATF, that we can do more with evidence, such as the shell cases that we recover from these shooting scenes, where we're actually putting them in a computer-based system in order to match those shell cases up with other incidents that have occurred, not only just in Montgomery County, but also in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan region. And we're starting to be able to connect cases that sometimes happen here, and then they're happening in the District of Columbia, and they're also happening in places like Prince George's County. And again, so then we are be able to network with our other local partners and be able to share information on possible suspects and individuals who are involved in these heinous crimes in order to be able to make cases against these individuals. So these are some of the things that I think that are important. And I will tell you, we have investigators who work very hard, and people who work on our crime scene. Investigators and forensic investigators are working very hard in order to be able to solve crimes. But, at the end of the day, we've got to do a lot of things on the preventive end and the deterrence end. Again, we have to look at our resources, how we actually deploy our resources, how we are, we look at a problem, we are able to sometimes take officers from other districts and bring them to districts such as the 3rd District in Silver Spring to assist our officers when we see that we have a problem that we need to solve. So there are significant strategies that are involved in this, that we are constantly talking about it during our crime stat meetings in order to come up with successful strategies in order to try to resolve these issues.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to turn to President Hucker. I know that he was the one who asked that this specifically be on our agenda today, though all of us wanted on our agenda today. And we're all going to work that this someday is going to come off of our agenda, that we're not going to have these difficulties. But President Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for adding this. So, yeah, Chief, if you could help elaborate on this. I've received a lot of information. A lot of it's sort of confusing. I've talked to officers who believe they're not supposed to go on Veterans Plaza or to make arrests there. I've talked to other law enforcement officials who said that trespass authority, that your officers need to make arrests on Veterans Plaza, has to be granted by the staff of the Silver Spring Civic Building. And that 2 years ago, it was taken away from police enforcing for marijuana use on the plaza. And that I think that may have been the original intent of the CE's directive to not make arrests for marijuana use, but that it's been overly broadly interpreted or implemented or something, so that officers are staying away from there. They feel like they're not supposed to go there. The boss doesn't want them in Silver Spring, is what I've been told. And that they don't have currently the authority to make those kind of arrests on the plaza. Can you clear that up?
Absolutely. So where I will start with is really about the trespass authority on the plaza.
Right.
The plaza and the Silver Spring Civic Center are Montgomery County's property. Under that, we look at, when we talk about trespassing, we are really looking at disruptive behavior that individuals may be having at those locations, and we are going to ban them from the property for an amount of time. The county has a law on its book called the Disruptive Order Behavior Law, that basically the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer of county government, basically has the authority to implement those orders and issue those orders. And the police department is the representative or the individual who runs these facilities, for example, would would actually be the signing authority that basically, as the officer provides this individual with the disruptive order, that then bans them from that property for a certain amount of time in which the CAO may authorize. That individual generally will have a hearing before the CAO if they so choose. I don't know the exact timeline, but I think it's within a 90-day period, and then they make a decision on how long that individual would be banned from the property. That is in place currently. I've had conversations with our current Chief Administrative Officer, Rich Battolino. He has given our officers that authority. We are utilizing that currently for the officers who are actually responding to the plaza and doing, particularly on this crime suppression detail, that they are focused on that under the direction of Commander McBain. Now, I will say this, Mr. Hooker, as it relates to some, again, previous actions of officers. I will tell you, officers were basically not so inclined to get involved in minor type of drug offenses, such as marijuana possession around Silver Spring Plaza, or in many areas of Silver Spring, for that matter, and not just Silver Spring, in some parts of the county. Just because, again, we got lots of allegations about dealing with individuals, particularly of African American race or Latinos, people of color, right? That basically would say that the department is, we're actually going after these individuals, sort of in a racial profile standpoint, not really just addressing the behavior. And again, we had a lot of other issues on the plaza, I'm sure, as you all are aware of.
Yeah.
That also involved the skateboarding that should not have been allowed, and individuals who were being a little bit, again, disruptive to families and particularly, young children being around, and language being stated out that, that we would not find as acceptable language being stated around young people. So all of those things, again, there had some bearing on our officers about, again, and I will tell you, in today's environment, as officers were actually going to address these issues with some of these young people and these individuals, our officers were actually being cursed at and yelled at by these individuals, and therefore they did not want to create these moments of confrontation, and so therefore they just disengaged to that degree. Mm-hmm. We again, having further discussion with Commander McBain, we felt that there was a need for us to have, again, support, not only just for the community, but we also needed support from the county executive as well as the county council members in order for officers to feel comfortable about doing their jobs, because they felt like there's been a lot of criticism that's been going on, and it really centered around our morale issue. And so as much as, again, I have stressed to them that I still want our officers doing their jobs. I stress this often. I've stressed it many times before. And now I will tell you that I believe that officers feel as if they have some confidence that people are supporting them. That's how this suppression task force was created, with a group of officers that we know are going to be proactive in addressing those issues of quality of life issues and public safety issues in the downtown area. But again, it's something this is something that, again, I've stated this multiple times as this being one of my the toughest leadership challenges that I've had during this time of police reform. And we all know of all of the discussions that we've had about this over time. But this has really gone to the psyche of policing in not only in Montgomery County, but policing in America, right? It's about engagement and how people, again, the one thing I've always stated about Montgomery County is that we've always been a department that focused on proactive policing. And proactive policing means that you're actually being out in front of incidents, in fact, deterring and preventing some crimes from even occurring. Some crimes, we'll never be able to stop them, but we want to be able to deter them as much as possible, make it tougher for those individuals involved in the criminal element to even think about doing those types of crimes in our area because we're going to be there. We're going to address it and the like. Now, there's times that, we now feel like we become more of and there have been people even from the political world who stated that they don't want proactive policing. They'd rather see more reactive policing because they think that we should just respond to calls and basically, in my mind is stating that you just want to clean up the mess, which I think is a poor approach to how we need to address crime in Montgomery County. Because when you become a reactive police department, then in reality, your crime rate is going to go through the roof. And I don't think that's where we want to stay. I don't think we want to get there. I don't think we want to be there at all. I think that there's an opportunity for us to be proactive. And again, there's no doubt in my mind that officers doing the job the right way, the way that we've trained them, they get the job done. They do it proactively. They do it within the guidelines of the Constitution and how we train them to do it here in the state of Maryland. It's very interesting in all these discussions. It's very rare that I hear, and I've not heard John McCarthy state that there's this significant problem with officers who are doing things unconstitutionally that the courts, that judges have made that publicly over the course of the past so many years, because again, we work well with our criminal justice system to make sure that we are not violating individuals' rights. And if we have officers that are doing that, I think we address those issues. But I don't think that is not a problem within this police department. So therefore, as we are moving forward, and as we're talking about being proactive in policing, that officers have to have the confidence to know that the community supports what they are going to do, and how they are policing our community in a fair and just manner. And it's unfortunate that sometimes people only want to look at the race of the individual in the end. They don't want to look at the behavior, right? So if I have two black males who literally stand in the middle of Georgia Avenue and fire 40 rounds of an illegal gun at each other, and I'm supposed to ignore that because they are people of color? No, right? That is not, it is really addressing the behavior. It's not addressing the race of the individuals that are involved. So for me, I think what we really need to start really looking at, I can't solve all of our social ills problems as much as I would love to be that person who has the magic wand. I don't. In our police department, again, we deal with it from a different perspective. But I think that the reality, we want to create safer communities, such as downtown Silver Spring, from that perspective. And I think, again, we've come up with some strategies to begin to address that. It's not the end to the end all, but it's something that we've got to look at, that we continue our monitoring, that we can come up with new strategies along the way. Because I've always, as you know, having worked with you when I was the commander down there, Silver Spring is a growing area. It continues to grow. But guess what? I don't think at the end of the day, the infrastructure has grown with downtown Silver Spring. I've stated this for over 5 years now. I stated it when I was a commander down there because I felt like we have a nightlife in downtown Silver Spring now. When I was a patrol officer that worked in Silver Spring in the 90s, there was zero nightlife. But now you have a very robust nightlife in downtown Silver Spring that goes into the wee hours of the morning. And when we really look at that, we did not kind of boost the amount of public safety personnel that needed to be down there to address that quality. If you go to places in like DC, if you go to Georgetown, if you go to the Washington Harbor where there is a nightlife, you will see the resources necessary in order to be able to support that and to make sure that the communities remain safe. We haven't done that here, and for a variety of reasons that we could have another session on getting in talking about. But those are the things that I see as things that we need to figure out. Being proactive from a standpoint, and when we have high visibility of officers on street corners, and in certain areas where we have a lot of people walking around and could be victims of crime. When you have that presence, that's the deterrence that I'm talking about, that we would want. So those are the things that I think that where we need to get to.
Thank you. I know we're grateful for the additional 6 officers on top of the 4. Do we now have fewer officers in Silver Spring than we did when you were commander?
Yes, we do. And that you know, that's not, again, that we look at attrition over time. And part of that is for the fact that we have less police officers today, right, on our police department than we had when I first took over as chief. But again, you know, when we look at the 3rd district over time, you know, some of the best officers, I will tell you, come out of the 3rd district. And those officers, because they are very good in their own right, they decide to become detectives. They decide they want to be promoted. So in the meantime, as they leave our district out of the patrol division, it is very hard to replace them when we are not bringing in new officers in our recruit classes, as we've done over the past few years, particularly in the lower numbers that we're providing. We're not being able to supplement those officers and replace them the way that we did in years past.
Right. So I just want to be clear. So the trespass authority that you had several years ago was taken away, but now has it been restored?
Well, all I would say is yes, the CAO has restored basically and been on the front side of enforcing any disruptive behavior that's occurring on at the Veterans Plaza or the Civic Center. Yes.
Okay, good. When did that happen?
That happened a couple of months ago.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, to your earlier point, I think you have all of our support, certainly, to, as you said, you know, enforce the law with compassion, with constitutionally, you know, make arrests with probable cause, focus on behavior, not race, all those things. I think we've said that many times. I've talked to officers who have said part of the problem with the understaffing is that we've had so many officers move from patrol to specialized units, and that our patrol, which is, I understand, supposed to be the backbone of any good police department, has been sort of hollowed out because of people moving to specialized units. Is that a concern?
Well, it is a concern. I will tell you that I speak to the assistant chiefs often as we talk about position vacancies in some of our investigative units, as an example. But we have other specialized units along the way throughout the rest of the department. But those are all authorized positions that the council has already given us for each one of these particular units, whether they're an investigative or a support unit. But what happens is, in reality, let's say where our biggest loss happens is when people resign or retire from the attrition, and we're not making it up on the back end of the recruitment process and putting those recruits in the recruit classes to fill that void, because they would be your replacement individuals that are actually going to be going to our patrol units to actually help to support the numbers of people that we need.
Yeah.
And so that's when you really look at it from a perspective of where we start to see those losses, is because in the past, I would say 2 years particularly, and it may be even more than that, where our recruit class numbers have been lower, right, and we have not really kept up with our attrition numbers, and that's what's hurt us. So basically, we are now having to, you know, we're at this critical crossroad, right? Patrol is always, the patrol bureau is always your 911, the officers who are your first responders, answering your 911 calls, you know, calls for emergencies and the like, and your patrol officers. That is literally, that's where you see the vast majority of our officers, and that's the backbone of this department. And if we, you know, again, if those numbers start dwindling in such a way that it negatively continues to impact us, then I have to make a decision to look at some of these other services that we provide in other aspects of the department and actually pull back those officers from those particular units and
Right.
actually put those positions in patrol.
Good.
So that's a tough decision to make, but I don't want to have to make that because this county has a lot of needs.
Right.
We have significant needs. We are a 1.1 million, plus community. And again, we need to have more officers to be able to provide the services that I think our community demands. Because as you can tell, the auto theft unit is an example. It is an example of where people feel that there's a negative impact of me disbanding that unit.
Right.
And so there would be more of that.
Yeah.
If you're not able to really sort of overcome this obstacle of where we are today in attrition.
Well, yeah, I'm for raising pay, as you know. Is it safe to assume most of the 60 officers vacancies that Susan cited earlier are in patrol?
I would probably say the majority of them are, not all of them, but I would say the majority of them are. Yeah.
Do you know how many officers we've lost to other jurisdictions in the last year or two?
That may be hard to say. Again, from the resignation end, if we're talking about sort of officers who have resigned, we're starting to see. We saw an increase. We were sort of kind of at our normal levels up until about middle of this year. We started to see an increase of about 18 to 20%.
Right.
Then we started seeing, now not everybody necessarily went to another police department. Some people removed themselves from the profession.
Retired or whatever. Yeah, right.
But there were some who did go to other police departments and other, whether it was here in Maryland or, in fact, I had 3 resignations put on my desk just recently who is getting ready to go to the fire department. So there are significant changes that some individuals are making. But again, we're starting to see again, and again, this is what I want to make sure that this committee and the council understands.
Yeah.
Today, 20% of this police department is eligible to retire.
Right.
We go back to the years of, I think, 1994, 1995 in that area. We had a large, we were producing large classes of recruits that were filling vacancies at that time. Well, those individuals are now eligible to retire.
Right.
And some of them have already retired, and some of them are on the cusp of retiring. So therefore that says that we are in this significant crisis right now of really trying to retaining our people and providing that so we don't see these more decreases in our personnel.
And Chief, you and I have talked a lot about how big the 3rd district is. It's roughly my whole district from the DC line to the Howard County line. A lot of complicated communities in there. When Silver Spring, the 3rd district station, was moved from Sligo to White Oak, obviously that moved it farther away from downtown Silver Spring and increased the response times in the view of a lot of people. There has been the discussion of opening up a 7th district or something in downtown Silver Spring and subdividing. We just redistricted ourselves recently, or in the process. Are we any closer to having a station back in Silver Spring in downtown? Because I'd be very supportive of that. I think we need one.
So the answer is no, we're not any closer. What I have looked at, and I continuously look at, is that I said when I first became chief, and I let this be known to the county executive, that I believe that this police department, that we have only 6 police districts in the entire county.
Right.
If you look at our across the river to Fairfax County, they have a larger police department, but they have land mass and basically response time and the area and the amount of people. They have 9 police districts. We have 6. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you again, I think, what I was focused upon, and I still am going to do it from a strategic plan, looking at a 3 to 5 year plan, is to produce a document that supports that. We look at a more, again, Silver Spring has become a more urbanized community. right? And again, and with that growth, I think Commander McBain was just telling me just last week that they are building an apartment building with 1,000 residents that is going up in downtown Silver Spring, 1,000 units. So again, growth continues to happen, but again, we have not kind of looked at where we can change the mentality of how we police and how we strategically put our personnel in these locations. So I think that there's a way for us to really think about that differently, because I think there has to be a focus on our more populated areas particularly, but also a redistricting across the entire county.
Yeah.
And we've done that in years past. We've redistricted when we created, when I first came on the police department, there were only 5 police districts in 1985. And it was like that until probably the late 90s. And then we created the Gaithersburg Montgomery Village district. And broke because Germantown was a large area, but it covered Gaithersburg, Montgomery Village, Damascus, Poolsville, the whole 9 yards. Well, we had to realize again with the growth of Clarksburg, the growth of Germantown and the like at Gaithersburg and Montgomery Village, we needed to break that up. I think that's where we need to start thinking about Silver Spring. We need to think about Wheaton, even breaking parts of Wheaton up, right? And there's ways to really look at that across the board to look at some new boundaries, and that's what I am focused on our staff to really come up with that plan in order to do something different.
Thanks. I'm sorry. Thanks for being so indulgent, Mr. Chairman. I also wanted to ask you, Chief, about your interactions with our individuals experiencing homelessness. There's a lot in Silver Spring. I get a lot of concerns and complaints from neighbors and business owners who want a compassionate solution to them and don't want them just wandering the streets during the day. I've heard frustration from our officers that they have had to enforce things like public defecation, and then they find the same individual back doing that again the very next day. And when I met with Commander McBain shortly after he took over, and that was like back in September, I was surprised that even though we had funded more mobile crisis units, that he said he thought that was great, but there was still a huge number of emergency petitions called in Silver Spring alone, like 400 in the first 250 days of the year, more, 1.5 per day on the average. And that there hadn't been a meeting, at least back then, I don't know, so I'd like to know if it happened, between the police and HHS, so that he said, he would call the crisis hotline just like you or I might, but he didn't know what happens after that and their whole series of steps to engage that individual that's homeless. So could you talk about how integrated that is now and how effective it is and whether we need more crisis units? Because it seems like your officers are still being called in to enforce these emergency petitions and taken off things that we'd probably rather them doing.
So, I think at the end of the day, we had a meeting with HHS and working with their homeless liaison, and we've been doing that over the past few months. As we get those, particularly the repetitive issues of individuals that are experiencing homelessness in downtown Silver Spring and have created some issues within our particular communities, looking for some viable solutions in many ways. The mental health community, there's still a vast majority of problems. Again, when there's individuals that we've identified, the mental health crisis individuals workers have identified that some of these individuals need hospitalization. And to be quite frankful with you all, there's no beds available for these individuals to go. So They are pretty much left to be in our communities. And if they're homeless, then they continuously are going to be an issue until they get the help that they need. And so I think that is an ongoing conversation that we're having, that we're working with some behavioral leadership across the county about this type of crisis, and how do we go about it. Again, in the world of reimagining policing, large discussion about taking policing out of homelessness. I don't disagree, but I think that when it does impact quality of life for businesses and the other parts of the community, and then there might be that mental health component that, that there still has to be sort of a connectivity as we try to address these quality of life issues. Not that arresting individuals is the answer. I am not stating that. I've been a big supporter of what the court system has done with our mental health, courts that has helped guide some individuals out of, again, some of the problems that we've experienced with them, whether they were homeless or not, but giving them giving them more resources to help them along the way. But I will tell you, I think that's something, again, it is a part of the solution, because we've got to find services for these individuals. And this is not a police matter, but we are only sort of an avenue to try to help to educate individuals as we run through these problems of what's occurring. And you know this as well as I know this, Mr. Hucker, this has been going on for way far too long. This was happening in Silver Spring when I was a commander there. There are more resources available today, but there still remains some significant issues there of individuals who want to be homeless. There is not that, and it may be a mental health component behind the scenes there, or a large part of that. But at the end of the day, we have to figure out a way in order to help resolve and minimize this to the best of our ability. I will tell you, working with HHS, I think we have, there is a partnership there. There is continuous dialogue. We just need for that to grow. And that's something I've encouraged Commander McBain to make sure that don't give up on that, to make sure that we are totally engaged in that.
Thank you. Do we have enough cameras in downtown Silver Spring?
We are examining that now, and we are going to evaluate that and figure out exactly what we have and how that could be more effective if we could make that work.
And now that we're focused on the state legislature, what's preventing you from being able to impound vehicles that are involved in racing and reckless driving? And do we need a policy change at the state level?
Yes, because there's no law that allows us to be able to impound vehicles that are involved in this type of behavior. Law only allows us to be able to handle it from a traffic standpoint, but there is nothing that gives us the authority to be able to take away someone's vehicle at that moment. Okay. So there would have to be some legislation that would need to address that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn to Councilmember Vice President Albornoz. But Chief, is there a possibility that we could do some satellite stations?
Yes, there is a possibility. We could examine that. We do have a location in downtown Silver Spring. We have space in Fire Station 1. That is a possibility. I would just state that I think that we need more bodies to go with that. But yes, that we could put a footprint in a location such as downtown Silver Spring. But we'd have to look at sort of reshifting some focus and resources and hopefully adding some resources in order to do that.
Well, that could be a goal, and hopefully a short-term goal, but that could be a goal for us to work on as well. Councilmember Albornoz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know there's an effort to host a meeting in Silver Spring that's being organized by our business community in the next couple of weeks, in part because of what we're experiencing and what we're seeing. I appreciate Council President Hucker's questions and certainly associate myself with all of his comments as well. I had the opportunity to visit the 3rd District, and I have visited another district as well. This was earlier this year. And I found that there was a lot of tension, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger on a lot of different levels, which I appreciated, respected, and frankly needed to hear. There also was very candid discussion about confusion that some of the officers were feeling. Now, this was earlier this year, prior to state legislation having been finalized. But this council has passed a myriad of bills, all in an effort, and I've supported all of them, to ensure transparency and to help make sure that we acknowledge some of the challenges that have been long-lasting. But those collectively, along with state legislation, have just in a very human and reasonable way, led to some confusion with regards to policies and practices now that they formally have to be enacted. And so I think at least some of the hesitation or confusion is connected in some part to that, because officers want to do the right thing, but they also don't want to be liable if they do the wrong thing. And they're not exactly sure, they weren't when I met with them, where exactly those lines were as a matter of policy that we've pushed forward. So I guess, we need to consider moving forward as we enact these policies, establishing a reasonable runway for law enforcement to be able to absorb, process, and do that on top of all of the other responsibilities that they're responsible for, which I think is obviously going to be really important. And I also think that we need to do more to acknowledge and support the officers, particularly in the areas such as the 3rd District that are, and there are many of them, most of them, actively engaging in positive relationships with communities. And I've seen it with my own 2 eyes, the interaction and the connections that are happening. So I think there's obviously a myriad of solutions here that we're going to have to explore, starting with, just the practical ideas of adding more resources to law enforcement in the downtown area. I also think that we need to look at resurrecting some of the community-based efforts that were established as a partnership, such as Safe Silver Spring, which at its height was, and I used to participate in those meetings when I was first with the Recreation Department because of the need to enhance youth engagement in a way that was responsible and a true partnership and alliance between various organizations. I think those are the types of efforts that are going to be really important moving forward, because it's unfair to expect law enforcement alone to address these issues, although obviously they're in among the better positions to address them. And I also think that we need to set expectations in a way that are reasonable. We've had multiple joint committee sessions around the homeless issue, which is obviously very complicated because you have to layer in the lack of beds at the state level, the confusing policies, and a judicial system that has been scaling back because of the pandemic and is still trying to catch up to the logjam of cases that they're trying to address. And so they're compromised in their ability to address some of these issues as well. So there are a lot of layers to this that obviously we're going to need to address in a more holistic way. But I do think that in our public rhetoric, we have to coordinate. And both the council and working with law enforcement have to be on the same page. And I know that there have been efforts to get on the same page. And, it's difficult with 9 of us, all with different perspectives and ideas and personal and professional experiences, life experiences that are very real. But I think obviously what is going on is unacceptable. And I don't have a proposed solution on how specifically to align those talking points, but I think that there's a general acknowledgement that we've got a problem. And it needs to be resolved. And so I look forward to the ongoing presentations and discussions on this, but I would appreciate, Chief, just concrete recommendations, and some of them may have budget implications associated with them. I know things have been tense, and we as a body have obviously tried to meet this moment and be sensitive to, in every way imaginable and authentically imaginable, to the deep concerns that so many of us have in the community about so many different things. But we also have to realize the practical reality. And Susan talked about this, that communities of color are being disproportionately impacted by this violence, and that has to be addressed as well. So I rambled a little bit there. I apologize, but I know this is a really complex issue that we're all very, very focused on addressing, and so I appreciate this conversation. I'm sure there will be more.
Thank you. I associate myself with much of what both of you have said. We literally are at a crossroads, and we've together trying to make certain that people are treated with dignity and are treated in a responsible, in a professional manner, and they are in those very few instances when they have not been. We have that we have worked to make certain that those individual police officers or whoever are reprimanded. But I think what we need to make certain is that we need to come together as a community again and remind our police officers how important they are to our community. It's never been an easy job. Never been an easy job. But it's gotten even that much more difficult. One of the reasons that we're seeing the lack of recruits is because for so many years you could talk to a police officer and they'd say, "Well, my father, my grandfather, my mother was a police officer, and I'm the fourth or fifth generation." The legacies are not there. The parents are saying to their children, "I don't know if you want to do this." Well, we've got to change that as well. Montgomery County needs to remain the good place that it has always been for someone to work, whether it's firefighters, police officers, bus drivers, whatever. And we need to fix that. We need to fix it quickly. We need to make certain that our salaries, which have gotten too low, are raised, and that means the entire scale, because if a recruit is not going to get the same salary as somebody that's been here for 5 years, we need to make certain that our recruitment improves dramatically. We need to figure out what to do and how to do it, and we need to do it quickly. We need to do it for this budget. When this budget's coming up, we need to have all of their answers right then. And so I continue to look forward to working with you, Chief, and every one of your officers, and to thank them for what they do and to appreciate what they do. And we need to make certain that our communities, and we talked about downtown Silver Spring a lot, but the other communities, the other districts were Wheaton and Germantown. Those were the districts where they were mentioned dramatically, and the 6th district as well, the Gaithersburg Germantown district. We need to make certain that all of our districts, that every person in Montgomery County feels safe, and that they will remain to feel safe. So this conversation, we're not going to solve it today, but we need to make certain that we have this conversation, and not just a conversation. We need to have solutions as quickly as possible. So, Susan, I don't know at what point, of course, we'll discuss some of this during budget, but if there's anything that we need to do between now and when budget comes up, I stand ready, and I have a feeling my colleagues do as well, stand ready to work so that we can get to ourselves to that better place, because we're not there right now.
I don't have anything right at the moment to add to that. I do have some evidence-based best practices that can help with procedural justice that I can forward to you just to take under consideration. And I will get back to you with all the information, the follow-up questions that you had asked. I'll get that data to you and also include the information that you had wanted for the joint ENC and Public Safety Committee work session on the Community Engagement Officer and the new MOU.
And let me just say very clearly, we look forward to working with the community. That we know that there's a lot of good suggestions. There's a lot of great concern, and we look forward to working with them to get us to where we need to be as well. So, Susan, if you could, I think probably, I don't know that we can, how quickly we can get information for January, and Chief, for recruitment, I don't know how fast we can get it for January. Obviously, we're going to meet. Public Safety's already had something scheduled for the school, what used to be school resource officers and the safety in schools. But I think that we need to have an updated session on recruitment and what it's going to take in order for us to get ourselves back on track. Okay.
Absolutely. We'd be more than happy to provide you with those numbers, our recruitment efforts, and some of our strategies as we move forward, and what our numbers look like. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. So I would agree.
Very good. To my colleagues, anything else for this session?
No, I really appreciate the discussion, and I know we're going to continue it, but it's cleared a lot of things up for me, and look forward to continuing to move forward. Thanks.
Okay. You're good. You know, as I don't have to tell anybody here, in this line of work, misinformation sometimes lasts longer than information. And we need to make certain that we are giving the proper information. And then when there's a problem, we need to solve the problem. We now know that there's a lot of problems we need to solve. So, very good. Thank you, Susan. As once again, you've done a wonderful job going through some very difficult topics. So, with that, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Chief, and to your team, thank you very much. And with that, we're going to adjourn for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Montgomery County ride-on buses will resume with limited